Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Emily.
And we are the voices of Tarbis. In a nutshell, we travel to different historical places and events and we blog about them.
But we wanted to try a different medium, so we're branching out into podcasts.
Each week, we'll have a chat about different periods of history, important events, and extraordinary people in one way or another.
And we'll round it all off with a relevant, ridiculous death. So, sit back, grab a drink, and enjoy Tarbis After Hours.
Hello and welcome to this week's Tarbis After Hours. Now, we've done in the past couple of ones villains. Well,
We have.
We've done a hero slash villain, Oliver Cromwell, and we've done pirates who are technically villains because they were illegal. So we're going to keep up the sort of theme here.
It is October after all.
It is. And we're going to go with highwaymen this time. And arguably the most famous highwayman, Dick Turpin. So if I say Dick Turpin to you, what do you think?
I think of a brave and handsome hero who was a wonderful rider.
Mm-hmm.
He rode his gallant horse, Black Bess, all the way from Essex to York in record time to prove he couldn't have committed such a crime that he was being told that he'd done, and that he robbed stagecoaches, but was also very polite about it, especially to the ladies. He was like this hero, kind of like Robin Hood-esque, but a little bit more villainous, but was still polite and nice and very handsome and rode.
So like swashbuckling, dandy, very romantic sort of hero.
Yes.
The vast majority of that is not true or was not him.
Well, tell me the truth then, Carrie.
Let's start from the beginning, shall we? 'Cause
That's always a good place to start.
Jinx. Right, he was born, allegedly, we say allegedly because of record keeping at the time, it might be a little bit either side, on the 21st of September 1705 at the Bluebell Inn in Hempstead in Essex. He was born to John Turpin and Mary Elizabeth Parmenter. Now, John Turpin used to be a butcher and he was the landlord of the pub, the Bluebell Inn. His name was Richard Turpin, not Dick, that's sort of a nickname, and he became an apprentice butcher to follow in his father's footsteps. He married Elizabeth Millington, moved to Buckhurst Hill in Essex in 1730. All above board so far.
Yep.
Very nice, tied up in a ribbon. However, this is when things start to go south. And boy, do they go south quickly.
Yeah.
When he was in Essex, he started rustling cattle because he realised that butchery probably wasn't the most lucrative business.
No.
I mean, it was pretty
not at
good.
the time.
No. But he decided he'd probably get more money stealing or rustling cattle than he would butchering them. He fell in with a gang called the Gregory Gang. Now, the Gregory Gang were made up of a number of members. One of them, actually, surprisingly, I found out, was a woman, which you wouldn't really think of. There were the three brothers, the Gregory brothers, Samuel, Jeremiah and Jasper, Joseph Rose, John Jones, Thomas Roden, John Wheeler, and Mary Brazier. Now, they were not a nice bunch.
No.
The good old gang of Gregory. They were ruthless, let's put it that way. And they were deer poachers, but also violent burglars. And reading up through some of the things that they did, it changes the glamorous image of Dick Turpin when you realise what he was involved in.
Yeah, basically one of the things that Turpin and the Gregory gang did, it's quite shocking, really. Even by today's standards, it's shocking. So, basically they invaded the home of an elderly lady. It was a widow Shelley, and this was in February time in 1735. They threatened her at gunpoint with her life if she didn't tell them where she hid her savings. Obviously back then there were no banks as we know them today, so you kept your money at home. So they threatened her with gunpoint if she didn't tell her where they were keeping them. She kept refusing. They then threatened to burn her alive and in her own house, they'd set her house on fire and burn her alive inside. She still didn't. She's got guts, this woman. She has.
That's gumption.
Isn't it just? She still refused, and her son, who was also there at the time, he caved. He offered to tell them where the money was if they spared his mum. He did. They stole £100 from her.
Ooh.
A silver tankard, other silver plates, and household goods.
Okay.
So they've stolen from her. They've threatened her at gunpoint. They then drink several bottles of her ale and wine, broiled her meat, and then finished it off with a fillet of veal.
So they robbed her, threatened to put her over a fire and roast her alive, threatened to shoot her, and then ate all her food and drank her alcohol.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, at those times you couldn't really drink water too much. It wasn't safe. They didn't
No.
have the filtering that we have now. So that was pretty much her fluid supply.
But believe it or not,
Yeah.
that isn't the worst bit of this story.
All right.
While this was going on, 2 of the gang members went to a home of Mr. Tuckle,
Mhm.
who was a tenant of Widow Shelley.
Right.
They robbed him of just over £20. They stole 2 of his horses and fled.
Okay. Just to put that in context, £200 back then is the equivalent of about £20,000 now.
Yeah.
So they stole essentially £10,000 from this woman, and about nearly £2,000 from this guy. And household goods and silver plates. If you didn't have money, you'd buy stuff for your house. So like you'd buy crockery and things that you would display, and then in times of hardship you could sell that. So you'd sell your plate. So they basically stole all of her savings.
Yeah.
All of her pension and everything.
Yeah. And stealing horses at this time was also a capital offence.
Yeah.
As you'll find out later on. But the horses were actually found the next morning.
Right. Well, that's something at least.
Yeah. So that's what they did on that one particular evening.
Well, I see your Widow Shelley and raise you Joseph Lawrence.
Okay, hit me.
Joseph Lawrence was a 70-year-old farmer in Edgware, and they invaded his home, dragged him round by the nose with his trousers around his ankles. So this is a 70-year-old man. They drop his trousers round his ankles and then drag him around by his nose. So indignity enough, beat him forcefully on his backside and on his head. So they're battering this poor old man, and then they force him to sit down on a fire, still with his pants down.
Jeez.
But whilst a few of them were doing that, a couple of the others went and raped one of his maids.
This is not the Dick Turpin story that we're led to believe.
No, this is very much not the Dick Turpin story we're led to believe. This is not a glamorous, dandy highwayman
Who was polite to women because
Yeah.
his gang raped them.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know if he did that,
We
but
don't know
we know
he
that
did,
he was involved.
but the gang did.
Yeah. All accounts of what he later did prove that he wasn't really that good as a highwayman.
Not as in the gang.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the gang were good,
No.
but they wanted to steal stuff. They stole stuff, so they did what they set out to do. It wasn't good
yeah.
at all. As a highwayman on his own, not so great.
Yeah, he was good at being bad with other people.
Yeah.
He basically, when the gang of with the Gregory gang, I keep saying the gang of Gregory. Thanks, Horrible Histories. When the Gregory gang, they got caught in 1735, and Turpin managed to escape. So quite a few of them were caught, sent to prison. A couple of them disbanded. Turpin escaped. So this is when his career as a highwayman began. And this is where he meets his next partner in crime, shall we say, Tom King.
Yeah. Basically, Tom King kind of sets the precedent for how Dick Turpin's life as a highwayman was going to begin.
Yeah.
He decided that he was going to try his hand at being a highwayman. He stopped a gentleman on the road, as highwaymen do, threatened him with a pistol. That was Tom King, the famous highwayman.
Nicknamed the Captain.
Dick Turpin tried to highwayman the highwayman.
Yep. Great one there, Dick.
Yeah, but
Good
seeing this, Tom King obviously saw something in Dick Turpin and took him under his wing for a couple of years, terrorising the Essex roads.
To be fair, it sounds like kind of a ye olde Pinky in the Brain set up there.
Does
If I'm honest.
What an analogy!
One is a genius, the other's Dick Turpin.
Wow.
Anyway, Tom King, they had sort of a bit of semi-success.
Yeah.
And then Turpin turpined.
Is that the new thing?
That is the new thing. If you are turpining. Basically, what happened is he tried to steal another horse.
Yeah.
Yeah. They at that point he yeah, he. I'm trying to figure out how to put it. There was an accident where he shot a guy called Morris. At that time, they were living within the Epping Forest, sort of living rough, and there was a bounty out on their heads, obviously being highwaymen. And this guy called Morris, who was one of the forest keepers, he found Dick Turpin, tried to capture him, tried to bring him in for the reward. Turpin shot him and killed him. This is his first of 2 that we know of murders. Shortly after that, he then came across a man called Mr. Major, who had a really, really nice looking horse, a very fine horse, and Turpin really wanted the horse in exchange for his knackered old horse. And he basically harassed him into giving him his horse. Mr. Major wasn't too happy about this, so he put out pamphlets and bits of paper describing the horse and naming Dick Turpin as the thief. How he got Dick Turpin's name, I don't know. We could probably only say that he held him up and said, "I am Dick Turpin, give me your horse," because that's in keeping.
That's Turpining.
Yes, that is Turpining indeed. What had happened is he'd taken the horse to the Red Lion pub in Whitechapel, and that was where Tom King was going to meet him, and they were going to come and collect it. Obviously, because the word had got out from Mr. Major that his horse had gone missing, the police were already waiting there, or the equivalent back then of the police were already waiting there. And they captured King. Turpin came in to rescue his friends.
This is similar to the Turpin we know and love.
Yeah.
The hero, the valiant horse rider, the I'm gonna be good. He rode in, guns blazing, attempting to rescue his friend from the police. He didn't shoot a police officer. He missed completely and shot Tom King instead. He literally... King was caught, Turpin tried to rescue him and shot his partner.
Yep.
That's the biggest Turpining of Turpinings.
Yeah. But King got his own back for the accident, shall we call it?
It was. He never meant to shoot him.
No, I mean, he was just a really crap shot. Turpin was given up by King. Just before he died, he basically told the constables everything about Turpin, and that forced him to flee. So, for a while he was living in Epping Forest, and then he eventually made his way up to York. And this is where it all starts to come unstuck for dear old Dick.
Well, you say dear old Dick, this is where he changes his name.
Yeah, he's no longer Dick Turpin, he is now...
John Palmer.
John Palmer. Now, he lived in York, and no one really knew him, but at that time there wasn't really records in the way that we have them now, so you could just move to another town, and he potentially would have gotten away with it if he hadn't have gone back to his old ways.
If he hadn't Turpined. If
Yeah.
he'd stayed John Palmer, everything probably would have been alright.
But our good old valiant hero was a bit of a twit. He used to go over to Lincolnshire and do sheep rustling raids. He'd poach sheep, he'd hunt, and he just basically lived this life of crime, poaching and rustling sheep. He, however, one day had a slightly unsuccessful hunt, shall we say, came back and got very, very drunk. As you would do to commiserate.
Yes, and at the time, obviously, you don't drink water.
Yeah.
So he must have had to drink a lot to get drunker, and if they drink alcohol all the time.
Well, they used to drink something called small ale, which was like weak, watered down beer. So it was watered down in so much as they could use water back then, but it was a really weak beer, and they'd have it with breakfast and everything. They'd mainly drink wine with their evening meal. So they'd be so used to it that it would take a lot to get them sourced. But he'd had a bad day. He was annoyed. He was upset. He had nothing to show for it. He was probably not going to be able to pay for whatever he wanted that week. It was annoying. You're going to have to go out tomorrow and do it all again. You know, it's just, ugh, right?
So what do?
You shoot your landlord's cockerel.
Why wouldn't you?
You shoot your landlord's prize cockerel, and then when your landlord comes out being all annoyed and like, why have you shot my cockerel, which you would do, you then threaten to shoot your landlord if he doesn't shut up.
Oh, Turpin.
Yeah. It just gets better and better.
John Palmer.
So they arrested him for his behaviour,
Mm-hmm.
and then they started making inquiries, and because obviously he hadn't lived there that long, no one really knew him, so they were like, well, who is John Palmer, he'd spent some time in Lincoln, so the constables that arrested him spoke to the constables in Lincoln, like their counterparts there, and they'd heard of him for a couple of months, and whilst he was there, they had suspected him of 2 counts of horse theft.
Going back to what we said before about horse theft being a capital punishment.
Yep. Now, the evidence was circumstantial, at best. But it was what happened next. And as far as epic highwayman's story, you know, dashing, sword fighting, swashbuckling, you know, daring right to the end, it's such an anticlimax.
He Turpined, but it wasn't... Nobody in their right mind could have literally guessed that this would happen.
No,
This is so unfair. Not that he shouldn't have been caught.
Well, no.
But
It's fate at its worst, isn't it?
Yeah. It is a massive twist of fate.
It is. There was a reward out for him at this time, which was £200, which, as I said earlier, was £2,000 in today's money. So that's
£20,000.
£20,000. Sorry, thank you. In today's money, and he tried to get himself off of the charges, and he knew that the evidence against him with the horse theft was circumspect, so he asked for character references, and one of the character references he asked for was from his brother-in-law. Now, his brother-in-law had an absolutely fantastic name, and his brother-in-law was Pomper Rivenel.
Pomper.
Spelt Pompr.
Cool. And obviously, being brother-in-law, he was the husband of his sister Dorothy.
Yeah, so we had Dorothy and Dick, brother and sister.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of family history there for you. Now, we don't know why he did it, but Rivenel refused to pay the postage of the letter.
Yeah, because this was the days before stamps, so you had to pay 6p postage charge.
Yeah.
And Rivenel said no, basically.
Either whether he was tight-fisted, whether he didn't want to pay it, whether he didn't want anything to do with it, whether he recognised the handwriting and just thought, no, you know what, let the police have him, things like that. He didn't pay for it, so it got returned to the local post office. Working at the post office was a gentleman called James Smith.
Yeah, and here is the twist of fate. Smith happened to be one of Richard Turpin's old teachers.
Mm-hmm.
He'd taught him how to write. So James Smith recognised the handwriting and outed John Palmer to be Dick Turpin.
Now, he went to the local constables because the order to arrest Dick Turpin and the reward came from on the order of the king himself.
Oh.
Yeah, it's quite serious. I mean, horse thievery was serious. Highwayman, yeah. Burglary, yeah. All that, yeah. Horse thievery, no. And, yeah, that was a major thing. So he took the letter to the nearest constable, the nearest magistrate authority, and said, you know, this is my suspicion, I think it's Dick Turpin, I haven't read it yet. And then he read it to them at the time, and it was confirmed that it was Dick Turpin from what was written inside. So he obviously got the £200 reward, which was a big bonus for him, and they managed to tie the other crimes to good old John Palmer.
See, I don't like, because everything we're saying about Dick Turpin is obviously not the guy that we know, but I just feel like that's irony, that is fate not liking you, wanting you to get your just reward, right?
Right, I mean, it's the way when we were talking about it earlier when we were doing the research, it's a bit unfortunate. It's sort of an anticlimax in the way he was caught, because it's like Al Capone and all of his gangs and his murdering and his bootlegging and everything. He was caught on account of tax evasion, and then all the rest came to light. Dick Turpin, murderer, thief, burglar, cattle rustler, everything, caught for shooting a cockerel.
And then executed for writing a letter.
Yeah. Essentially.
He would not have been found to be Dick Turpin if his brother-in-law had kept the letter, or if he just hadn't written it.
Yeah. If he hadn't have gone back to his old ways, if his brother-in-law had paid the 6p and opened the letter and provided a character witness for him, if he'd have managed to get the other ones, then it would have been okay. There's a lot of what ifs.
A lot of stuff went against him.
Yeah.
He was meant to be caught.
I mean, when he was first imprisoned, he was at the Beverley House of Correction, And then when the whole horse thief allegations came to light on the 16th of October 1738, he was transferred to York Castle because obviously with it being a capital offence he was there to await execution. York was near Tyburn. Tyburn was like the place to hang people. Turpin thought that he was going to be sent back and tried in Essex, where he was from, which is why he didn't bother telling people to come to York to give him a character witness. It's why he didn't think he thought he had a bit more time. However, when everything came to light, his trial was rushed through at York, so he had no one there. He had no witnesses, and at that time it was incredibly expensive to hire a lawyer. So the vast majority of the time you were defending yourself. So he was defending himself, being the idiot that he was, against such crimes as that were capital offences, without character witnesses, because he'd not bothered to tell them all to come.
Oh,
he didn't really
Turpined.
Yeah, he didn't really stand a chance, did he? Let's be honest here. And they would have. I mean, the evidence was circumstantial, as I say, with the horses. So they would have found a way.
Yeah, and he was put on trial
Mm-hmm.
on the 22nd of March 1739, and he was found guilty of 2 counts of horse theft, and he was sentenced to death.
So it was the horse theft that sentenced him, and then the highwayman stuff just added on top.
Yeah, so he was going to die anyway,
Yeah.
but writing that letter just was like, at least we know, I guess, Dick Turpin he ended.
Yeah. He was actually executed on the 7th of April 1739, so quite speedily after, a couple of weeks after. And he used some of his ill-gotten gains, some of the money that he'd robbed and got from rustling sheep and things. He used it to buy himself a new coat and shoes to wear on the day. Because, everyone wants to look dapper when they're going to die.
Yeah, but apart from that, he also hired professional mourners.
Well, he told everybody not to bother coming, so there's not going to be anybody there.
Bless him.
But apparently he was taken through the streets of York in an open-topped cart, and that was when his proper highwayman bravado came out, because he tried to. I mean, obviously you would try to put on a brave face. At that point, you know what's going to happen. You sort of 9 times out of 10, you would be freaking out, but you'd reconcile yourself to it. There's nothing you could do about it. So he put on a bit of a show, and apparently when he was taken up to the gallows, which were at Knavesmire in Tyburn, he was waving and bowing to the crowd.
Well, he was quite liked, wasn't he, old Turpin? When people found out that he wasn't John Palmer, just the random, cockerel shooter, he was actually Dick Turpin. The people in the prison used to let people pay to come and see him, because he was that infamous that people used to pay to go and see him in prison. Some of these women used to pay to make use of his conjugal rights, shall we say?
My.
Yeah, people would pay to go and see Dick Turpin.
See in inverted commas.
Yep.
Yeah. So at least his imprisonment wasn't all bad. Potentially.
Oh.
I mean, he would have had some high points.
Yeah, double entendre there, Carrie.
Sorry.
But yeah, so he was executed.
Yeah. The execution is another twist.
Another
little,
Turpin.
Yeah, another little bit of irony, really. Because York didn't actually, despite being a main execution place, they didn't actually have an executioner. What they did instead was certain prisoners would be offered a pardon for performing the service themselves. So if you were a prisoner of slightly lesser crimes...
Yeah, you weren't going to be killed, but you were going to serve some time.
Yeah, then you could commute that sentence and potentially be pardoned by being the executioner yourself. So you could get let off execution by being the executioner.
Yeah, and this happened for Dick Turpin.
Mm-hmm.
He was hung by a fellow called Thomas Hadfield.
Yep.
A fellow highwayman.
Awkward.
A highwayman killed by a highwayman.
Yep. Or a highwayman killing the highwayman.
Oh. Yeah. But his story doesn't actually end on his execution date.
No, it
Being
doesn't.
Dick Turpin, obviously, he was buried quite quickly after he was executed. I think it was the next day, wasn't it?
Yeah. On his execution, apparently it took him about 5 minutes to die. According to the Gentleman's Magazine, he threw himself off the scaffold rather because a lot of the time the execution would have to push them because obviously you wouldn't want to do it. He just jumped off, and it took him a full 5 minutes.
Ooh.
Which means either the rope wasn't long enough or they hadn't factored in his weight, so he wasn't heavy enough.
That's a long time.
Yeah, because what you want ideally is a rope that's long enough to drop with... They used to call it the short drop and sudden stop, because you drop to snap the neck and that'd be quick.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it was a heavier person, not quite as long a drop, so that they'd break their own neck. But obviously they didn't factor that in properly.
Well, like you said,
wasn't experienced.
Yeah, and like you said, they rushed his trial to execution quite quickly. So.
Yeah. 5 minutes.
But then he was buried in St George's Churchyard in Fishergate in York on the 8th of April 1739.
So the very next day.
Yeah.
Okay.
But a week later, his body was dug up and was sold to a surgeon for illegal medical dissection.
Ooh.
Yeah, but both of these men, both the men, so the one who dug him up and the surgeon, they were later arrested when it came to light what had happened, and Turpin's body was then reburied.
Yeah, I mean, apparently the people of York were very, very unhappy about this. I mean, you had the same sort of thing going on with Burke and Hare up in Edinburgh, and it did lead to quite a lot of medical discovery, admittedly, but it's not a good way of doing it because we'll come back to Burke and Hare at another point, but theirs basically ended in murder. Like they would find, again inverted commas, all these newly dead friends of theirs, who conveniently fell down the stairs or cut their head off shaving, sort of thing. And yeah, it was that sort of situation. But the people of York weren't having that. There was a big angry mob. These guys got arrested. But there is a rumour that the body buried in Dick Turpin's grave may not be Dick Turpin, because if he had more than one body on the go, it may have just been someone else that they grabbed and bunged in. Who knows?
Knowing Dick Turpin, there'll be some sort of unfortunate event that happened to his body. It would have Turpined even when he had died.
Yeah, probably just the angry mob rushed in and just ran him over.
Yeah.
Yeah. But his gravestone is still in St George's Churchyard, and it does have his name on there, also known as John Palmer.
Because he was. So, in a nutshell, that is the story, the true story of Dick Turpin. Slightly different to the gallant hero.
Yeah. He didn't have... Black Bess wasn't his horse. That was one thing. He didn't... I mean, he obviously had a horse, but it wasn't Black Bess. That was something that was made up as part of a novel called Rockwood by Harrison Ainsworth, which was published in the 1840s, I believe. Please, if I'm wrong, correct me.
So this is when they started to try and glamorise Dick Turpin.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So, but also another myth to bust. He didn't ride from Westminster to York in 24 hours. No. That was actually Swift John Nevison. Mm-hmm. But what Dick Turpin actually did, he rode...
Oh no, this was John Nevison that did this.
My bad. He rode 190 miles in under 20 hours to give himself an alibi for a robbery he had committed in Kent. So the story that you're told of Dick Turpin riding Black Bess in under 24 hours is actually just a story of Swift.
Yeah, it looks like when the novel was written, it's sort of... They brought together a load of different highwaymen and all of their different myths and just put it into one. And because of Dick Turpin's sort of bravado around his execution, they probably made him the likely hero. Mm-hmm. Now, I was looking into this because I was kind of intrigued, and there's a good website that I'm going to put the link up to on the show notes that has helped with this. It's called nowyouknow.org, and I was intrigued as to where we got Dick from, as in Richard. Now, Richard originally is from the Proto-Germanic Ricatu, meaning hard ruler. So, like a tough ruler. It was then translated into Old German as Richard, and then into Old French as Richard before being anglicised into Richard, which is, a lot of our languages from French, Saxon, German sort of area, and Greek and Latin. Shortened versions were then used, such as Rick or Rich, when everything was written by hand, because, pre-printing press. People then started to rhyme names to give nicknames. So Rick became Dick or Hick sometime around the 13th century. So from there, ever since the 13th century, we've been calling people Dick or Hick. Obviously, Hick has sort of died out, but Dick has caught on. So, yeah.
But and going back to obviously his name, there was actually, when you said that Dick Turpin was there was money for him.
Yep.
There was also on the flyers was a description of Dick Turpin. So obviously we've got this idea that we're told that he's really handsome, that he's the English gentleman. He was just like the epitome of man, because that's how he's meant to think of,
dashing.
Yes, on a horseback, looking all beautiful.
His tricorn hat and his ruffled collar and his red sleeves.
Yep.
Yep.
Actually, I'm not saying that any of these is bad at all, but he's described to be about 5'9" high, brown complexion, very marked with smallpox.
Okay.
His cheekbones were broad. His face was thinner towards the bottom. His visage was short. He was pretty upright and pretty broad about the shoulders.
And that's from an article published in a Gentleman's Magazine in 1737, and that was part of an appeal to find the killer of Thomas Morris, who was the guy he killed in Epping Forest. So that says that 5'9" it's still, it's about average for a man, isn't it? That average. It's just shy of 6 foot, so he's fairly tallish, broad around the shoulders, quite upright. So he's obviously got good posture. He's quite upright. Broad around the shoulders means that he could be relatively strong, maybe not a weedy guy, and quite a narrow face. Smallpox. Smallpox was caught a certain way, so possibly not entirely faithful to his wife. Just putting that out there. So yeah, he's got
possibly not
face.
faithful. People paid to go and sleep with him in prison.
This was before,
right?
But at that point, we actually don't know what happened to his wife.
Oh no,
No, just thinking about that.
I want to know.
His poor wife.
Check back another time.
Yeah. But yeah, he sounds quite average, really, doesn't he?
He does. He doesn't sound like the strapping guy upon horseback that we have came to know and love. So, Dick Turpin, you are no longer the gallant hero in the eyes of myself and of many who will listen to this podcast. You have been outed, and you are, quite frankly, not the highwayman that we know.
You are a Turpin.
Yes. So that's the end of this week's podcast, but obviously we end all of our podcasts with a ridiculous death. And Carrie, the ridiculous death, please.
This time I went for one who's in the same era but a little bit later. This is in the 1750s. This is Frederick, Prince of Wales. So it's a royal one. He was born on the 1st of February 1707 and is the son of King George II and the father of King George III. So he should have been king. He was very, very fond of cricket.
As in the sport?
As in the sport. Absolutely loved cricket. It was quite a prominent English sport. It was the main British sport at that point. And he was very good at it. However, it was cricket that killed him.
Aww.
He
turpined.
He turpined. In 1741, at the age of 44, good old Frederick was struck in the chest by a cricket ball.
So he was obviously like being a batsman, and someone threw the ball to him.
Potentially, or he could have been one of the fielders and the ball got smacked and it hit him. We don't know what position he was playing, but he's certainly no Freddie Flintoff. Because Freddie, Prince of Wales, had a pulmonary embolism that was originally thought to be a lung abscess caused by being hit in the chest by a cricket ball.
That must have been a hard cricket ball.
Well, they would have been rock solid. It might have been a cricket ball or an original proper tennis ball, which were wrapped leather. Pretty much, it would have felt like someone had wrapped leather around a rock. That's more or less what it would have felt like. And that hit him in the chest so hard it caused an embolism. And he died. So, play cricket. Cricket kills you. They say exercise never hurts anybody, but that's a testament to why risk it.
He turpined.
He turpined so bad, he died.
Aww.
So let's just take a second to think of Frederick, Prince of Wales, the man who could have been king, but for a rogue game of cricket. Poor Frederick. Right.
Until next time.
Good night.